For centuries, analyzing a piece of literature was a relatively straightforward exercise. Academics practiced what we now call traditional criticism, a framework that remained virtually unchallenged until the 20th century exploded it entirely. Under this classical model, a text was treated as a sacred object. Critics operated on two core assumptions. First, that a book contained the author's precise intended meaning, and second, that it delivered universal moral or aesthetic truths that applied to all people across all time. But the early 20th century delivered global wars, the collapse of empires, and rapid industrialization. This upheaval shattered the illusion of universal truths, as scholars realized that reading a text as a simple, objective message was no longer a viable way to understand a fracturing world. Traditional criticism viewed the text as a stable, isolated container for truth. By doing so, it entirely ignored the hidden biases of the writer, the reader, and the broader culture shaping them both. Walk into a university humanities department today, and you will hear a single monolithic term thrown around: theory. But these disciplines are frequently conflated, masking a massive divergence. We have to separate literary theory from critical theory by tracing their distinct origins. Let's follow the first path. Literary theory began as a mechanical inquiry into exactly how language generates meaning. Early literary theorists prioritized textual autonomy and linguistic form over an author's biography or politics. The second path is critical theory. This did not originate in literature departments. It is a sociological and philosophical movement designed to expose how cultural artifacts, everything from laws to pop music, perpetuate hidden power, ideology, and hierarchy. Critical theory does not exist merely to analyze society. Its stated, explicit objective is political emancipation, arming individuals with the tools to identify and dismantle the systemic domination controlling their lives. Grouping muse disciplines together under one label obscures a vast divide. Dissecting the mechanics of a sentence is a completely different exercise than diagnosing the pathology of a society. Returning to the literary track, the early 20th century saw the rise of schools like Russian formalism and American New Criticism. The formalists treated the literary text as a closed, autonomous system. To them, historical context, the author's intent, and the reader's emotional reaction were irrelevant distractions from the words on the page. This mechanical obsession evolved into structuralism, heavily drawing from the work of Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. Saussure's structuralism argued that meaning is not intrinsic to a word. A word only means something because of its position within a larger system of cultural codes and binary oppositions. Light only holds meaning because we contrast it structurally against dark. This moved the academic spotlight away from what a specific text meant and onto the underlying systems and rules that allow meaning to exist in the first place. The early literary tract stripped human emotion and historical struggle from the text, reducing literature to cold, structural mathematics. While the literary scholars were mapping language, a much darker reality was shaping the critical tract. In 1923 Germany, a group of thinkers founded the Institute for Social Research, which would soon be known as the Frankfurt School. The institute was born out of a severe ideological crisis. Orthodox Marxist theory relied on economic determinism, the absolute certainty that capitalism would inevitably collapse and trigger a working-class revolution. That prediction failed completely. Instead of liberation, the 1930s delivered catastrophic totalitarianism. The working classes were being consumed by the rise of fascism in Germany and the brutal, authoritarian grip of Stalinism in the Soviet Union. The school needed a new framework to understand this geopolitical disaster. In 1937, the Institute's director, Max Horkheimer, officially coined the term critical theory. Working closely with Horkheimer was Theodor Adorno, a philosopher who steered the school away from strict economics and toward a deep, relentless critique of culture. Alongside thinkers like Walter Benjamin and Herbert Marcuse, the Frankfurt School theorists built a bridge connecting society, art, and systemic oppression. They pivoted from economic Marxism to cultural Marxism to answer one terrifying question: why were the oppressed actively embracing their oppressors? Their answer arrived in the form of the Frankfurt School's most enduring diagnosis: the culture industry. They argued that mass entertainment, movies, radio, and magazines, was carefully engineered by capitalist structures to generate social compliance. Herbert Marcuse expanded on this, describing a one-dimensional society. In this environment, authentic political dissent is quickly commodified, packaged as a rebellious product, and sold back to the public, neutralizing any real threat to the system. The culture industry replaces true intellectual freedom with a comfortable illusion of choice. You can select from a wide menu of entertainment, but every option on that menu reinforces the same pre-approved ideologies. In this framework, entertainment functions as a primary, invisible mechanism of ideological enforcement. By the late 20th century, these two paths intersected. Literary theory's structural focus integrated with critical theory's political objectives, producing a diverse landscape of contemporary analysis. The first result of this convergence was post-structuralism. Theorists began to realize that the rigid, mathematical binaries of early structuralism were actually fragile constructions, built by those in power to maintain control. Philosopher Jacques Derrida pioneered deconstruction, arguing that textual meaning is inherently unstable. Language constantly refers to other words, meaning absolute truth is infinitely deferred and impossible to pin down. Psychoanalytic criticism took the clinical tools developed by Sigmund Freud and applied them to texts, reading literature as a manifestation of the unconscious mind and symbolic desires. Marxist literary criticism explicitly combined the two historical tracks, treating novels and poems as political artifacts that actively reproduce or occasionally contest capitalist class relations. Feminist theory, propelled by writers like Simone de Beauvoir, interrogated literature to expose systemic patriarchy and the historical framing of women as the other. This evolved into a radical questioning of gender itself. Theorists like Judith Butler argued that gender is not an innate biological binary, but a performed social construct enforced by language and culture. Simultaneously, post-colonial theory, spearheaded by Edward Said's concept of Orientalism, critiqued how Western texts constructed exotic, inferior representations of the East to justify the ongoing dynamics of empire. This convergence quickly gave rise to queer theory, which dismantles heteronormative boundaries, and new Historicism, which analyzes Renaissance texts by mapping the precise flows of historical power around the author. Because of this intellectual intersection, reading is no longer considered a neutral act. Exposing the hidden ideological frameworks woven into our language operates as a direct political intervention. Today, the strict boundary between literary criticism and critical theory has dissolved entirely, blending into the broad modern discipline known as cultural studies. Modern theory acknowledges a single reality. Language is never an innocent vehicle for communication. It is a live battleground of ideology, identity, and institutional structure. Apply a Marxist framework to a novel, and it becomes a story of class struggle. Read it through post-colonialism, and it's a map of imperial decay. The text entirely changes meaning depending on the specific theoretical lens you look through. Theory functions as an active diagnostic tool for the world at large, far outstripping its origins in textual interpretation. It draws equally from the Frankfurt School's demand to critique power and post-structuralism's tools to dismantle the mechanics of language. Ultimately, theory serves to map how the architecture of our institutions, our mass media, and our everyday speech writes itself directly into the human mind.